Imagine a stranger knocks on your front door today and offers to sell you a vacuum cleaner. You'd probably check the peephole, ignore it, and go back to whatever you were doing. Maybe you'd call it in. But 50 years ago, you'd have opened that door, stepped aside, and let him in. You might have made him coffee. That's how different the world was. The door-to-door salesman wasn't a nuisance in mid-century America. He was a fixture, expected, often welcomed, sometimes looked forward to the way you'd look forward to a visit from a neighbor you actually liked. At the peak of the trade in the late 1960s, nearly 4 million Americans earned their living this way, walking the streets of every suburb and small town in the country, sample case in hand. Then that world ended. Not in a single season, not because of one invention or one law, but through a slow accumulation of changes that, taken together, made the front door the last place anyone wanted to do business. It's a Tuesday morning in 1958. You hear the knock, 2 firm raps, unhurried, and when you open the door, there's a man in a pressed white shirt and dark trousers standing on your porch. He's holding a brown leather case with chrome latches, and he's already smiling. He introduces himself by name. He asks if this is a good time. It usually is. You don't invite him in immediately. There's a brief exchange on the threshold. He mentions what he's carrying. You half listen while a child calls from the back of the house, and then you open the door wider because the case looks substantial, and he came all this way. The screen door hinges squeal as it swings shut behind him. He sets the case on the kitchen table and clicks those latches open with a practiced snap, the sound clean and deliberate in the quiet house. Inside, onto everything is fitted into shaped foam, brushes of different sizes, each in its own cavity, handles in dark wood and pale plastic, the bristles stiff and densely packed. He lifts one out and runs the pad of his thumb across the bristle ends, lets you feel the firmness yourself. He talks while you touch it. He knows the names of things: boar hair, Tampico fiber, nylon. He says them like a craftsman would. He sweeps a sample across your countertop in one smooth stroke, then holds it up so you can see what it collected. He does the same on the tile floor, and the bristles scrape with a soft, deliberate rasp that seems to prove something. He shows you the bottle brush, the baby bottle brush, the radiator brush, each one specific to a problem you hadn't thought to solve. He has an answer for every object in your kitchen. When you hesitate at the price, he doesn't push. He starts demonstrating again. By the time he leaves, half an hour later, maybe more, you've bought 3 brushes. He writes your order in a small carbon copy notebook, tears off your copy, and tells you he'll be back next month. He will be. The system that made that visit possible had been operating in one form or another since the late 1800s, and by the post-war years, it had become a sophisticated machine. A company like the Fuller Brush Company, founded in 1906 by Alfred Fuller in a rented barn in Hartford, Connecticut, had tens of thousands of salesmen organized into territories, each territory carefully mapped to a neighborhood block, a subdivision, a stretch of houses along a county road. The man who knocked on your door almost certainly lived nearby. He walked an average of 6 miles a day, working his territory from house to house, noting which customers were loyal, which ones needed following up, which doors never opened. Companies like Avon, Electrolux, World Book, and Kirby operated on similar frameworks. The salesman carried product samples or demonstration models he owned or rented from the company. He placed orders that were fulfilled by a warehouse and delivered in subsequent visits or by mail. There were no storefronts. There was no inventory sitting in a back room. The salesman himself was the store, moving, talking, demonstrating, closing. The social protocols were unwritten but consistent. You invited him in if you were interested. You listened out of courtesy, even if you weren't. A good salesman read the cues: a woman glancing at the clock, children getting restless, and a husband arriving home unexpectedly. He adjusted. The best ones didn't feel like salesmen. They felt like people who happened to have something useful. Products varied by region and income level. In working-class neighborhoods, the focus was durable household goods at installment prices. In newer suburbs, encyclopedias and home appliances played to aspirations about education and modern living. In some cities, there were distinct territories for different demographics, and sales approaches were tailored accordingly. It wasn't a uniform experience across the country. Where you lived and what you could afford shaped who knocked on your door and what they were selling. The economics of the system made sense in a specific way and at a specific moment. Consider what was available. For a set of World Book encyclopedias in 1965 cost between $800 and $1,000, the equivalent of roughly $8,000 to $10,000 in today's money. For a family earning the median household income of around $6,900 that year, that was a significant purchase. But the salesman didn't ask you to write a check. He offered a payment plan, $12 a month, sometimes less. The encyclopedia came in boxes over several weeks. You could afford it because he broke it down, and because he was sitting across from you explaining exactly why your children needed it. An Electrolux vacuum cleaner sold for $69.75 in 1955, about $760 adjusted for inflation. At a time when a department store appliance required a car trip, a parking space, and a salesperson who knew the floor but not your house, the man who came to you and demonstrated the machine on your actual carpet, on your actual kitchen rug, offered something the store couldn't match. You could see it work. You could watch the demonstration canister fill. For the salesman, the economics were equally compelling. Fuller brush men earned no base salary. They worked on straight commission, typically 30 to 50% of each sale depending on volume. A productive man in a good territory could earn a solid middle-class income. Avon grew from 26,000 representatives in the early 1950s to more than 6 million by the 1970s, many of them women building household incomes in an era when formal employment options for women were narrow. The system wasn't charity. It paid on both sides precisely because the product reached the customer at the point of consideration, but inside the home where the need was visible and the decision was immediate. Then 4 things happened in roughly the same 20-year window, and the logic of the door-to-door system came apart. The first was structural. Women made up 29% of the U.S. labor force in 1950. By 1980, that figure had risen to 43%, and it kept climbing. Among women aged 25 to 54, exactly the demographic who had historically answered the door in the middle of a Tuesday morning. The labor force participation rate went from 37% in 1950 to more than 67% by 1985. The house that had been full during the day was now empty. You couldn't sell to someone who wasn't home. The salesman knocked on locked doors. He left calling cards that no one called back. The economic foundation of the visit, a customer with time, present in the home, available for a half-hour demonstration, was quietly disappearing from tens of millions of addresses across the country. The second force arrived on October 8, 1956, when the Southdale Center opened in Edina, Minnesota. It was the first fully enclosed shopping mall in the United States, a climate-controlled building filled with dozens of stores, free parking, and every product category a household might need, available without an appointment and without a stranger in your kitchen. By 1960, malls were spreading rapidly through the new suburbs. By the early 1970s, hundreds of them dotted the American landscape, each one offering a vacuum cleaner department, a housewares section, a bookstore, a cosmetics counter. The consumer didn't need to wait for a salesman. She could go get it herself, compare prices, return it easily, and choose her own timeline. The third shift came from Washington. In October 1972, the Federal Trade Commission promulgated the Cooling-Off Rule, which took effect in June 1974. It gave consumers the right to cancel any door-to-door purchase over $25 within 3 business days. The rule existed because high-pressure sales tactics in the home had become a documented problem. Contracts signed under duress, elderly customers sold products they neither wanted nor understood. The legal mechanism was reasonable, but it altered the economics of home sales fundamentally. That 30-minute visit, that carefully built demonstration, that signed order in the carbon copy notebook, any of it could be legally undone by a letter mailed before midnight on the third day. Cancellation rates climbed. Companies found that the cost of a visit, when measured against the risk of reversal, changed the math on marginal sales. The fourth force hit in the late 1990s and accelerated sharply through the early 2000s. U.S. retail e-commerce sales were $27.6 billion in the year 2000. By 2024, that number had grown to nearly $1.2 trillion. The Internet didn't just move shopping, it moved the entire rationale for the in-home visit. The encyclopedia that had been worth $900 because knowledge was hard to access was now worth nothing against a free search. The product demonstration that had been irreplaceable because you couldn't see a vacuum working from a catalog was now available as a video review on your computer screen. By 2003, when the National Do Not Call Registry went into effect, and 50 million phone numbers were removed from telemarketing lists within its first year, the signal was unmistakable. Americans were no longer willing to accept unsolicited commercial contact at home, whether by phone or by knock. The companies didn't give up easily, and the transition from one world to the other was not a clean break. Through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, door-to-door and retail coexisted in an awkward overlap. The same vacuum cleaner available at Sears, but still being demonstrated in homes by a salesman who hoped the in-person pitch could justify a price premium. Fuller Brush, which had relied entirely on door-to-door selling since 1906, held on until 1985 before finally beginning to shift toward mail-order catalog sales. But the calculation that finally pushed them was straightforward. The cost of maintaining a territory salesman, his time, his travel, his training, no longer paid back in volume what it once had. Avon, which had transformed that same model into a cultural institution with its famous ding-dong Avon calling television campaigns of the 1950s and 1960s, found its customer base aging while new customers were increasingly unavailable at home. The company tried recruiting younger representatives, restructuring its commission system, and eventually opening its first retail stores in the United Kingdom in 2018 because, as the company acknowledged, its customers had stopped being at home. In August 2024, Avon Products filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the United States. The numbers tell the adaptation story cleanly. In 2000, roughly 33,000 Americans were employed in door-to-door sales. By 2010, that number had collapsed to fewer than 7,000, a drop of nearly 80% in a single decade. By 2023, the Bureau of Labor Statistics counted just 6,220 people in the entire category. The customers had moved online. The houses were empty during the day. The products were cheaper at Target. The arithmetic no longer worked, and most of the people who had once worked those territories found other things to do. But it wasn't just a job that disappeared. It was a particular kind of knowing. The salesman who came to your door month after month knew things about your household that no algorithm has since replicated. He knew which brush you preferred. He knew you had a baby and needed soft bristle models. He knew your husband worked nights, and not to knock before 10. He knew your neighbor had just bought the deluxe set, and might have told you about it. That knowledge accumulated through physical presence, through repeated visits, through the kind of attention that exists only when a person's income depends on a relationship rather than a transaction. There was also something that functioned like informal accountability. The brush company man came back. If the handle split or the bristles splayed, you told him directly and he handled it. The complaint had a face. The resolution had a name. That chain of human accountability was replaced gradually and then completely by return policies, customer service lines, and dispute processes that are efficient in their own way, but begin and end with no one who knows your address. What disappeared, too, there was a certain literacy about products, a hands-on understanding of what things were made of, how they functioned, why one version was worth more than another. The salesman's demonstration was also, whether he intended it or not, an education. You learned what Tampico fiber was. You learned why bristle density mattered on tile versus carpet. That knowledge didn't come with the product when it arrived in a brown box on your porch. It required a person to carry it to you. The transition was probably inevitable. The economics were unsustainable once the home stopped being occupied during business hours. But something real did close when those doors stopped opening. What the door-to-door salesman's disappearance reflects is a larger inversion that ran through the second half of the 20th century. And the home went from being a place where commerce came to you, to a place you left to find commerce, to a place where commerce arrives without human intermediary at all. Each shift represented a gain, in convenience, in price, in selection, and a loss in something harder to name. The texture of commercial life became smoother, faster, and considerably less personal. The assumption that once governed household purchasing, that a knowledgeable person standing in front of you was worth the premium he charged, was replaced by the assumption that information is free, that choice is better than recommendation, and that the lowest available price is usually the most honest one. Neither assumption is entirely right, but the transition between them happened so gradually that most people didn't notice it as a transition. When you just stopped answering the door one day, and eventually nobody knocked. If you remember those 2 firm knocks on a weekday morning, the click of the chrome latches on a sample case, the way a stranger could make you genuinely interested in a brush, you're holding a piece of social history that doesn't appear in most accounts of how American commerce changed. The door-to-door salesman didn't vanish because anyone decided to end him. He vanished because the world he needed to work in, a house with someone in it, a consumer without other options, a relationship across a threshold, quietly stopped existing. If this brought back something you'd half forgotten, leave it in the comments. What they sold in your neighborhood, how your family received them, whether they were welcomed or turned away. That's the part that doesn't exist in any archive. That's the part only you know. If you found value in this, a like helps more people find it. And if you're interested in what else disappeared so gradually that the ending was almost invisible, subscribing tells us that's worth continuing to explore. The front door is still there. Nobody knocks,